form with that name on this web page. So it's going to be the first thing that's returned. And I'll set style.display is equal to none, which would in effect make the form disappear. So I'll refresh it again, and now the form is gone, and it just says please enable cookies on your web browser. And I'll also, similar to the warning, I'll check to see if it exists first. And I'll check to see if the length of the node list that's returned is greater than 0 before I try to index into it. Now, another thing is that I can have an existing warning in here. I'll just set it to this is a system error. And it doesn't display this is a system error because I overwrite the inner HTML with please enable cookies on your web browser. So they never see this message. And if I wanted to get around that, I could do plus equals and then that message, which would work, but they're kind of bunched up together. So what I'll do is I'll create another variable called warning underscore message, and I'll do a document.create element. I'll tell it to create a paragraph tag. What that essentially does is it creates one of these in HTML. But I'll need to put the warning message between those two paragraph tags. So I'll do a warning message dot append child, and I'll do a document dot create text node with the actual message I want to put in between the opening and closing paragraph tags. And instead of setting the inner HTML, I'll do an append child, and I'll give it the paragraph tag, which is warning underscore message. And so that retains the system error message and adds the please enable cookies on your web browser message. Ideally, I want to make this check its own separate function. So I'll create a function that says, does client accept cookies? And I'll accept a cookie name as an argument. And I'll copy this code and paste it in here, and I'll change the inline PHP that I do on the session name with this cookie name parameter. Now the add comment form, I probably can't reuse this function on other pages because add comment is very specific to this video.php page. I'll remove the if statement where I hide the form. And in this function, I'll have a variable called accepts cookies. I'll assign that to true. And if it can't find the cookie, I'll set accepts cookies equals false. And I'll have it return accepts cookies. So what this function does is that it sees if the cookie exists or not, and if the cookie doesn't exist, I add the warning message to the page. and returns the fact if it accepts the cookie or not. Now, since I've created this function, I can now use it. And I'll call does accept cookies, pass it in the PHP session name, which I can inline. And if this is false, I can hide the form. So let's give this a try. It works for the most part. It just shows the form, so it indicates that something is not working correctly. And it's always due to a typo. This should be accepts cookies and not cookie. Let's try this one more time. Okay, there you go. So the form's hidden, and we see the please enable cookies message. And just to make sure that this works, if they accept cookies, I'll enable accepting cookies again, click on refresh, and we see the form again, and we don't see the cookie message. Using PHP to determine if a cookie is set on the client's web browser is a little bit more tricky and involved due to the order of events that take place. In video.php, which is the file that generates this page, I run a session_start, which puts the session cookie out on the web browser, and my first inclination would be to see if the cookie is set. What I would do is set, and I would use the super global cookie and index into that using sesh ID to see if it's set or not, and if it's not set, I would print out a warning message somewhere later down the page. And in reality, what happens is that when PHP runs this page for the first time, I do a session_start. It detects that the client does not have a cookie set, and so it will generate a new session identifier and send it out to the web browser. But it won't do that until it's finished processing this whole entire file. So the execution, it will go through all the lines of code or HTML on this page. After it's finished doing that, it would print out the header information, which contains things like, well, what cookies am I setting? What's the size of the HTML document in bytes? After it's finished doing that, it would send out the actual HTML content, and then control is given to the client's web browser, or person's web browser, and server-side processing has now finished. So I would need to have them come back to video.php so I can see if the cookie is actually set or not. So if the session cookie isn't set, and I'll create another variable called session name, and I'll set that to the value of session_name, which is usually PHP session ID, but that could change. So if it's not set, I would think, well, I would want them to come back to this page. And I would exit program execution, because I want to stop whatever I'm doing and have them come back over to here. So that would send the cookie over and then tell them to come back to this page, and no HTML content would be generated, just those headers. And this would work if the client's web browser or the person's web browser accepts cookies. But the problem is if they don't accept cookies, this would never be set. This would evaluate to true. So this header redirect would always occur, and they would be stuck in a loop. So I would need some sort of indicator to say, hey, I'm checking to see if this cookie is set. And if that indicator is not set, I would want to do the header redirect. One way I can go about doing that is to change the location, and I can introduce what's called a get parameter at the end of the web address or URI. And I can do that by doing a question mark after the file name, and I would put in the get parameter that I want to add. For example, if I want to check to see if the cookie exists, I'll just call it C for now, and I'll set that equal to 1. So if the cookie is not set, and if this get parameter of C is also not set, I'll want to do the header redirect. I'll also add another variable called accepts cookies, and I'll set that equal to true. And I'll add a else condition, and I'll add another check to see if the cookie is set after you do the initial header redirect. And if it's still not set, I'll set accepts cookies to false. When accepts cookies is false, I'll print out a warning message informing the person that they need to allow cookies. I'll say I'll say enable cookies on your web browser. Also, I don't want to show the add comment form if they don't accept cookies, because it wouldn't work. So if the accepts cookies is true, I'll display the form. Otherwise, I won't. So let me test this and see if this works. It doesn't display the message because the cookie is set. So I'll go to Tools, Options. I'll uncheck Accept Cookies from Sites, which would disable cookies on the web browser. And I'll go back to video.php. So now it says, please enable cookies on your web browser, and I don't see the form. So what they would naturally do is go to Tools, Options. Oh, I need to enable it. They would click OK. I would click on Refresh, and now everything's OK. Now it would be a good idea to turn this into a function. So if I wanted to use this in other pages, I don't have to copy and paste code. So I'll just create it in here. I'll create a function called does client accept cookies. And this would be the end of the function. If I were to reuse this in other pages, the other pages may not be called video.php, and I could substitute that with a server-side super global. Well, it's actually a key inside a server super global variable called php_self.